This is the Sony FX3. Now, I've been using this camera since the day it launched, and it has been my main workhorse for everything. I've used it for shooting commercials for TV, hundreds of vertical videos for socials, all the way to some photography as well. But here's the thing, this camera came out in 2021, but to this day, it is still hands down my favorite camera that you can buy, and it's still a camera that a ton of creators are calling their dream camera or are still picking up on a daily basis. So how is that possible for a camera that's coming up on being 3 years old, and that I think is gonna be at the top of the game for a long time in the future as well? But that's exactly what I wanna talk about in today's video. I wanna talk about what makes the Sony FX3 such a special and unique camera, and why I think this thing will be a top pick for a ton of creatives for a long time. So let's start by talking about the things I really love about the FX3 and what makes this such a unique camera. Now, I'm sure you guys are familiar with the different specs of the FX3, but it's one of the parts that really helps separate this camera from the rest. You're shooting 4K everything, 24 frames per second, 30, 60, all uncropped, and then all the way up to 120 frames per second in 4K, which is a tiny minimal 10% crop. So 4K everything, it looks beautiful. Now, it does have a 12 megapixel sensor, which makes it an absolute beast in low light. I would put this camera up against anything, and it also has a dual native ISO at 12,800. And what that means is, obviously as you start raising your ISO, especially in low light situations, you start getting a little bit more noise in your image. At 12,800, it basically wipes clean again, and you kind of start back fresh. So this thing is seriously insane in low light situations. And you also have a wide variety of picture profiles in this camera. S-Cinetone is very popular, but my personal favorite is S-Log3. I think you get up to 15 stops of dynamic range, and the image out of this is truly gorgeous. I mean, this camera has been used on feature films, so it goes without saying, but the specs on the FX3 are just insane. And to this day, still extremely good. Now, another great thing about this camera is the fact that it has tally lights. And in case you don't know what that is, once you hit record on this camera, you have a few different tally lights going so you can see that it's recording. You have the record button up top, the front little light right here. On the back, you have this giant light up top, as well as the screen has a red box around it. And you might be wondering, why does that actually matter? But if you film videos and you've been in this game for a while, I guarantee you at some point in your career, you have thought a camera was rolling and it wasn't. Especially if you have multiple cameras going, you have a couple different angles set up, maybe you have a podcast with 3-4 cameras going. Just be able to glance over the camera and have a visual signal, knowing that this camera is actually recording, is a huge help, and honestly, it's an underrated thing that I wish all cameras had. Now, next thing I love is all the mounting points to this camera. Now, when the FX3 came out, it was essentially the Sony a7S III, which was extremely successful, just kind of souped up a little bit more. And one of the additions to it is kind of having a built-in cage. So if you look at this camera body, it has different mounting points on the top, on the side. Obviously, you got your bottom mount, and then also on the other side. Now, myself, I'm someone who films a ton of vertical content. And let's be honest, really anyone these days is shooting some vertical content, whether it be for clients, for businesses, whether it just be for yourself and your own social platforms. Just being able to throw a plate on this camera on all 4 sides of it has made it so useful to me, and is a major reason why I'm always reaching for this camera. The built-in cage is a game changer. Now, another thing I'm a really big fan of is the internal fan. That was stupid. I might have to cut that. That was a bad joke. Now, all jokes aside, before I picked up this camera, I actually was shooting on a Canon. And one of the main issues that I had with that camera was the fact that it kept overheating on me. So the fact that this camera has that internal fan, you never have to worry about this camera overheating. As long as this thing has power, it's going to record until you run out of space. For most cameras on the market, I've heard of some people eventually being able to have something overheat. I've never heard about a story of the FX3. And again, if you are a content creator or you're shooting for clients, businesses, whatever, having a camera that you know is just reliable and you don't have to worry about, oh man, have I been recording for 25 minutes yet? Oh no, I've been recording for 40 minutes. It's probably getting close to overheating. You're just not gonna worry about that with this camera. And just having that peace of mind is sometimes worth a large investment. And I think that's what makes this camera so good. It's just all the little quality of life things. Like, even for example, it has a front record button. So whenever the camera is facing towards me, I can just hit that button and hit record, which again sounds sounds like a very small thing, but when you're using these cameras for hours on a daily basis, those little things really do add up. Now, another huge reason why I use the FX3 all the time is because of the top handle, which actually right now I'm actually shooting on an FX3 with the handle, so I'll show you guys some B-roll or photos of it. But on any of these newer Sony cameras, right, with their Sony microphones, you can plug it into the top and it records all the audio straight through the hot shoe. I don't know what kind of digital audio magic's going on, but you don't have to plug in the cord anymore. It just goes straight into the top. Well, it's the exact same thing with the top handle. It uses that same technology, but the huge plus of that is you can plug an XLR mic straight into that handle, so you can have an XLR microphone going straight into your FX3. Whenever I'm filming a video like this, a lot of times I have an XLR mic on top. Sometimes I'm using like the Rode Pod mic set up here on my desk, and it's plugged just straight into my camera. I'm no longer also recording into a Zoom recorder, then having to sync up audio in post. Again, another huge quality of life thing and stuff that just saves you time. And actually another really underrated thing about this camera is taking photos with it. Now, when this camera dropped initially, it got a ton of hate around the 12 megapixel sensor and how that's not very good for photography. And that's true to an extent. But number one, you gotta remember this camera is video forward. So if you are looking for a photography camera, this is not it. It does not even have an EVF, like, so come on now. But 12 megapixels is still actually plenty for a lot of photography, especially photos for social media, and especially for photos that you're not gonna crop in a ton. So chances are, if you look at even like my own IG page, most of the photos you see on my page are shot with this camera. With all the different social platforms compressing the crap out of your photos regardless, I'm telling you 12 megapixels is plenty for anything you're doing on socials. If you're getting into some crazy croppings or printing photos, of course, this isn't gonna be my first choice, but if you're a creator that is somewhat of a hybrid with a lot more dominance on the video side, and you need to take some stills from time to time, this camera is still a great option, and the photos out of it do look great, especially if you're shooting in low light. They look really good. Yo guys, so real quick, first of all, this video is not sponsored whatsoever. I just genuinely love the Sony FX3. But if you guys are looking for a way to support me in this channel, first of all, make sure you guys are subscribed. And second of all, I have a ton of digital products available on my store. I have my S-Log3 LUT, which is how I color grade all my Sony footage, Lightroom presets, my overlay pack, basically all the secret sauce to all of my content. First link down in the description. The support goes a long way for me in this channel. I appreciate you guys. Now back to the video. Now, truthfully, this camera is very close to still being perfect for me. Even after using it for hundreds and hundreds of hours over the last few years, there's only one main thing that's on my wish list for Sony in the future, and that is making this sensor open gate. And in case you don't know what open gate is, essentially when you record on a camera, you know, you have its full sensor, but when you record video, it crops into the 16:9, which is, you know, what video ratio is. And there's parts of the sensor you're actually not utilizing when you're recording videos. That's why when you take a raw photo, it's wider than a 16:9 image. Open gate would essentially just open that up. So when you record horizontally, you have some more room on the top and bottom. There are some cameras now out on the market that allow that. And being in this day and age where vertical content is so important, and there's a lot of creators like myself that record vertical and horizontal for a lot of things, that would just be so amazing. But wish list for Sony down the line. But with all those things being said, right, the FX3 is truly an amazing camera, and everything that I mentioned are things that make your life easier, things that save you time, some things just quality of life. And when you're investing this much money into a camera, you want it to just work how you need it to work. And there's this analogy that I love from the basketball world, right? You guys probably know. I'm big into sneakers, okay? But there's this saying about basketball shoes. The best basketball shoe is the one that you forget that you're actually wearing. If you have one that's too big, one that's too heavy, too clunky, every single step you're taking, you remember it's on your foot, you aren't actually focused on playing. You're focused on the shoe. And it kind of goes the same with your camera. This is the first camera I have ever owned where it does just what I need it to do. I don't have to worry about it overheating. I don't have to worry about, is it gonna be able to film this frame rate? Is it gonna be able to perform in low light? Whatever situation I'm in or I need to be in with this camera, I know it's gonna be reliable and I know it's going to do what I need it to do. It's essentially just an extension of my creative mind. And it's just like the shoe. You forget the shoes on your foot because it's doing just what it's supposed to do. And the same thing with this. I'm not focusing on the camera or worried about if this thing's doing what it needs to. Instead, I'm just focused on whatever my creative task is. And that's what makes this camera so magical, and that's why this camera is still something so many creators are picking up to this day. Like personally, I know myself, within my creative circle of friends that I have, I know over 20 people that have picked this camera up over the last few years, and there's people still picking this thing up within the last few months, calling it their dream camera. I don't know that many cameras that have been out longer than a year that people still say that about. It's pretty crazy. Oh yeah, and another amazing thing is Sony is still continuously updating this camera, which makes me think this is still kind of top of the game for quite some time. So should you pick up the Sony FX3? This is obviously not a cheap camera. Sony themselves makes a ton of different cameras out there. So here's what I would say. If you are a video professional, this is the camera that is really kind of the high standard out there. If you want to invest in something for your own creative business, this would be my #1 pick for you. That doesn't mean there aren't some other good options out there. Like even myself, I also have this Sony ZV-E1, and it's kind of like this camera's little brother. And I have more in-depth videos on that camera on my channel. Honestly, I have a lot of videos about a lot of the Sony cameras on my channel, so definitely check that out if you want some more in-depth info. But the ZV-E1, the Sony a7 IV, or even like the FX30, there are some other Sony cameras out there on the market that are some good options compared to this. All of those cameras just have a downside compared to this one, because in my opinion, this is kind of like the top of the top, the video flagship for video creators right now, in my opinion. So there's no doubt you're going to pay top dollar for this. So are all these things I mentioned in today's video worth it for you? I think that really comes down to you, your own budget, and how important all these features are to you or not. But to kind of sum everything up here, the FX3 truly is my favorite camera that I've ever used. This is the camera that made me switch from Canon 3 years ago, and it was the best decision I've ever made in my creative career. I've now had the opportunity to work with Sony. I've had the opportunity to use a ton of different cameras and lenses from them. And this is a brand that listens to their creators and truly is innovating our space. So guys, I hope you found this video helpful. Let me know down in the comments below what questions you have on the FX3, and I'll be responding to everybody that I can down there. Be sure to go follow me on my other socials if you want to check out some more content using this camera. I use it for most of my stuff. Check out more of the Sony content on my channel, and I'll catch you guys in the next video very, very soon. Peace, guys.